Right, great. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Hazlemere Climate Talks, to our 15th session. I'm Ed Gemmell. I'm the chairman of the Hazlemere Climate Emergency Working Party. I'm very pleased to see everybody here. You're welcome to introduce yourselves in the chat. And as we go through, please do go ahead and ask any questions you might have for Isaac in the chat as well, and then we'll come to the questions at the end. As you know, we're talking about climate emergencies and councils today, and Isaac is a bit of an expert in that. But for everybody to know, Hazlemere Parish Council at the beginning of last year declared a climate emergency and set a 2030 net zero target. Within our county, we are one of 4 who have declared climate emergencies, with Haddenham, Burnham and Buckingham Town. So it's pretty relevant for all of us. As a county, we have recognised the climate emergency, and whether or not that counts as declaring or not, but recognise the climate emergency, and are taking some action, but basically following the government line, whereas the 4 parish councils, or 3 parish and town councils I mentioned, are being much more energetic and trying to do a lot more, and all of us have 2030 targets. So I'd like to introduce Isaac Beaver. Isaac is representing Climate Emergency UK, which is probably the most important website providing information and encouragement to those who want to declare climate emergencies. They've just put together a special project on how to assess climate emergency declarations and progress within councils. I'm sure Isaac will tell us about it in a minute. And just to mention, there is a great friend and colleague of mine, Kevin Freer, who is involved with it, who has done some great work up in Lancaster, and has been for years now driving the Climate Emergency UK website. So thank you to him in absentia, and then over to you, Isaac. Thank you very much for doing the talk.
No worries, I really appreciate it, and it's really nice to be asked, and also just to be here tonight as well. And thanks for the introduction. So oh, just another person's joined. Cool. So just a little bit about me. I actually, sorry, as Ed has, can you hear me now? Is that okay? I think I've gone mute. Yeah, cool. I'm the Campaigns and Policy Officer at Climate Emergency UK, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of new climate policy frameworks that are being developed within the UK and instituted at the local authority level. But just a little bit about me. I was actually very fortunate to live on the unceded Coast Salish territories, which is otherwise known as Vancouver in Canada. And that's why I actually started off campaigning with an organisation called Force of Nature, which you can see those 2 photos there. And we were a community organising organisation whose theory of change was, by creating enough pressure at the local level, you could institute climate-friendly policies at council, and therefore, as we all respond to the environment around us, change people's behaviour and outlook on the world. I also have been a bit reticent of saying this in the past, but I thought it's good to be true to yourself. I also do take part in direct action, which is that bottom photo, and believe that my work, both inside and outside of council chambers, are both crucial and go hand in hand with each other. Ed has already mentioned a little bit about Climate Emergency UK, but I just thought just give a brief overview of us in case you haven't heard. So we were set up a few years ago by Councillor Kevin Freer in Lancaster in response to the climate emergency declarations. As already said, there's a list of them on our website. As we sought to compile a list of those from around the country. We then moved on to gathering climate action plans alongside My Society, and that website is data.climateemergency.uk, and that's a website where we sought to gather, as I said, all climate emergency action plans from local authorities across the country. And you can search on there for your own local climate action plan, but also search for themes across different climate action plans. So, you know, procurement or electric taxis, and see what other councils are mentioning them. We then went on to create a checklist for local authority climate action plans to state what should and shouldn't be, or what should be contained in a strong climate action plan. And that was really looking at the basis. You know, every climate action plan should have a baseline of emissions. Every one of them should define the scope of what they're actually targeting. Everyone should have a strong net zero target, which Ed's already alluded to as well. And what we're currently going on is we're currently scoring every local authority climate action plan based off of our checklist. So we have about 29 different criteria. At the moment, we've got over 100 volunteers to score and assess every local authority climate action plan in the UK, with the idea to create a council climate league, which will be released sometime next year. I'll just be clear as well, that doesn't include the parish level, because there are 10,000 parish councils, and it was impossible to know anything about that. So many people at that level, but yeah, we are, especially the larger parish councils like Froome and people like that, are doing some really interesting stuff around climate. As I said, today we're kind of focusing on the policy making frameworks that are being instituted at local authority levels after climate emergency declarations. And while most of this focuses on authorities that are above the parish level, I did think that it was still relevant because it's about decision-making policy. So even though you won't have the same powers as these local authorities that have instituted it, you could still institute the same frameworks and the way you make these decisions. So the first one is a top-down framework that's been introduced in Wales. So it's the Wales is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So all public bodies in Wales have to make decisions with the well-being of future generations in mind. And this requires public bodies to do things in pursuit of the economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being of Wales in a way that accords with the Sustainable Development Principle. So just to be clear, that's public bodies includes all local authorities, health boards, regional boards. And the reason why I flagged this, even though it wasn't created by local authorities, it was by the Welsh Government, top down to local authorities. It's really interesting to think of the perspective to basically give rights to future generations, which obviously are going to inherit the planet that we're currently living on. And how this works, sustainable development is defined as the process of improving the economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being of Wales by taking action and aimed at achieving the well-being goals. And these well-being goals are defined as all 7 goals: a prosperous Wales, a resilient Wales, a more equal Wales, a healthier Wales, a Wales of cohesive communities, a Wales of vibrant culture, a thriving Welsh language, and a globally responsible Wales. So while climate change is not directly listed in the goals, actions to tackle the climate crisis would fit into at least 6 of these goals. So particularly a globally responsible Wales and a resilient Wales, which would obviously resilience focusing on climate adaptation as well in particular. But the co-benefits of climate action, so having cleaner air, having people that active travel, so fitter and healthier, would fit into healthier Wales, and more equal Wales in the sense of sharing what we have within the resources of Wales and the earth, a more prosperous Wales, and a Wales of cohesive communities. All of the climate action co-benefits can be fitted within those wellbeing goals. And the Act also sets out five ways of working, and the most relevant for the 5 ways of working are the long-term and prevention being the most relevant. So I'll just omit that. So the 5 ways of working include collaboration, integration, involvement, long-term prevention. And long-term, which is really important, is the importance of balancing short-term needs with the needs to safeguard the ability to also meet long-term needs. And this is exactly what, when we're talking about with the climate crisis, it's the importance of balancing short-term pinch points with the need to safeguard future generations and the future of our planet. And prevention is obviously how acting to prevent problems occurring or getting worse may help public bodies meet their objectives. And so, as I said, it's these policy-making frameworks, this decision-making framework, that's such a different idea around how to think about a decision. If every decision you're having to make is, wait a second, how is this affecting future generations? What will this look like in 30 years or 50 years? What would it do if we have to cut down this forest for a road or something? How does that affect the future generations and their well-being? And I think that it's too early to say the impact on Welsh local authorities, but there are audit reports that have been released, and that's really fascinating to give that a read. The next one is everyone's favorite at the moment, which is coming to donut economics. This has been something that has been actually taken on by cities, a couple of cities across the world. So Amsterdam And I'll go into the English. There's a few English authorities that have also instituted their own decision-making wheels, or based off of the donut economics. So what is donut economics? It's the, if the slide moves, it's the idea that it's a new economic model that's been conceptualized by the economist Kate Raworth. And basically donut economics seeks to balance human needs with planetary needs. And so you can see here the example given, the red is where you're having too much of an impact on climate change, so emissions or biodiversity loss, and the shortfall would be, you know, putting people into poverty or lacking education, lacking good housing, gender equity, etc. And so I'm just going to play a short video from Kate Raworth, who's going to explain a little bit more about it themselves, because they're obviously the expert on it. I won't play the whole video, it will just be the first couple of minutes.
I could see or hear them, so I was peering around the corner.
Are they not muted?
This is the donut. This is the donut. The goal of the donut is to meet the needs of all people within the means of the planet. Sometimes when I present the ideas of donut economics, people say, is this capitalism, or is this communism, or is it socialism? And you think, really? Are these the only choices we have? The isms of the last century? Can we not come up with some ideas of our own and create new names for them and see new patterns? Governments in every country are almost addicted to citing GDP figures as if this was proof of success, and yet it's so clearly not. Because we have climate breakdown and COVID lockdown and financial meltdown, we have to pursue something far richer to move from this pursuit of endless growth, which we can now see is hitting us with crisis after crisis, moving to a goal of thriving. And the donut is absolutely possible to turn not into a single number, but into a dashboard. We could hold policymakers to account and say every year, you need to talk about how you are making progress on these different dimensions of the donut. The outside of the donut is created by leading Earth system scientists just a decade ago. These are the 9 life-supporting systems of planet Earth. To have a stable climate, to have healthy oceans, to have recharging fresh water. And they drew these and called them the planetary boundaries. And they said we must stay in the circle in the middle. I thought, but if we go to the center of the circle, where we use hardly any of Earth's resources, that's not thriving. That is actually death and destitution for billions of people. We need to convert Earth's lands for food, for water, for housing, for energy. So I drew this inner circle and said, just as there is an outer limit of humanity's pressure on the planet, so too there must be an inner limit. So the hole in the middle is a place where people are left falling short on the essentials of life. It's where people don't have the food, water, energy, healthcare, housing, education, political voice that every person has a claim to meeting. We want to leave nobody in this hole. Get everybody.
Cool. So that can seem a little bit really big for local authorities and the parish level to have to deal with, and it can be. That can seem a massive concept to try and take into account. But what's been really interesting is actually, this is the example from Cornwall. Local authorities have adopted new policy-making frameworks based off of the donut economic model. So Cornwall Unitary Authority is the best example of this so far. They're the furthest ahead, and they've adopted a variation of donut economics, which you can see on the slide. So they don't call it donut economics, they call this their decision-making wheel. And as you can see, some of the issues that they've included within the outside or the inside are slightly different to the actual donut economics. The one that Kate Raworth was shown in the video, they've adapted it to include, really important things like greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity loss, but also include things maybe around crime or sense of support, and renewable energy in there as well as different factors that are appropriate to them. And what's really important about this is that all decisions will now be made factoring in their decision-making wheel. So that means staff, and this is really crucial to understand, because you have councillors that you need the political will to be able to push climate change at the local level, but you also crucially need staff at councils to be able to understand why they're doing this and what's the importance of it as well. And that means with something like this, staff are now working to embed the decision-making wheel as part of their understanding of how to work. And it essentially makes sure that any trade-offs that you may have to take are worth the effort. There are obviously going to be difficulties with instituting a model like this. You know, what would trigger a green, amber, or red warning? For example, how much increase in air pollution would be amber or red? And also, it's important to remember that decisions are still political. Different politicians may have different levels of tolerance to negative impacts. One person might be really sensitive towards something like crime, but maybe not so sensitive towards biodiversity loss if they see that there's another benefit. And so it's not that this would be a kind of golden nugget where all the decisions are made perfectly all the time, but it does start to take into account every single thing that we should be taking into account in all our decisions. How does it affect greenhouse gas emissions? How does it affect biodiversity? How does it affect homes or quality of food or energy? And the above example is actually a live example that was used on Cornwall's website. It's actually about the creation of a bike lane, and they've shown the potential impacts that's a rural bike lane for each sector. And I did read the explanation for it because I was a little bit confused about what crime a bike lane could bring, and they were saying that it could lead to an increase in fly tipping because of where the cycle lane goes. But I think it's really important. They've shown even for like a small local level decision like the institutional bike lane, they've gone, okay, this is what it could lead to. You know, we're going to have to cut down a few trees on the way, so slight biodiversity loss, but it's made worth it because of the change in travel that will happen and therefore the impact on greenhouse gas emissions. And Cornwall are not the only ones. It's started to be adopted in other councils as well. So Cambridge City Council, so it's a district council, and also Derby City Council, another district council, have also started to create and adopt their own kind of decision-making wheels based off of donut economics. And interestingly, just today, I saw that Chesterfield Council have also instituted a similar kind of wheel where they're trying to take into account the climate impacts for all decisions as well. Not quite based like this, but very similar. And Oxfordshire County Council, so the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. What's really interesting about this, Oxfordshire County Council are basing their new policy framework on the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. So this is very, very recent. As you can see, maybe at the bottom of this article, this only happened on the 3rd of July that they made this pledge as a new council came into power. So Councillor Sudbury said it was the council's intention to frame its strategy around the provisions of the draft Climate and Ecological Bill. So that's the bill that's going through Parliament. And this involves the bill that's going through Parliament. These are the targets that they said they would meet. Setting and managing targets to decarbonise own activities as fast as possible, but at minimum in line with its share of the global carbon budget for 1.5 degrees. Addressing the climate and ecological emergencies in tandem, so matching emissions reduction with nature protection and recovery, taking full account of its impacts on the planet, cutting emissions and the ecological impact wherever they happen, supporting the development of a circular economy, minimising waste and ending the throwaway society, and involving representative groups of citizens directly in decision making. The target, they say that this is about all of us and our shared home, and a socially just transition, so not leaving anyone behind. So it's too early to say what Oxfordshire's kind of framework or intention or strategy would look like, because as I said, it's only happened a few months ago. But I think there's this a really interesting perspective that they've taken, again, something that is conducive to national legislation, but drilled it down to look at the local level about what would it look like for us to take into account managing targets to decarbonise. What would it look like for us to address the climate ecological emergencies in tandem? What does it look like to take full account of our impacts on the planet and supporting a circular economy? So I'm going to go into a kind of a new mindset around transport as well. So this is sector specific, but again, that's happening at the local level. So this is the idea of the 15-minute towns and cities, and it's a planning policy framework that's been mostly adopted by major cities. So it's been adopted by London, Barcelona, Paris, and I believe New York. And it's the idea that, again, all of your services should be within 15-minute cycle or walk of your home. And again, I know this is weird, I'm talking at a parish council level, but I'll try and tie in the relevance of why I think this is really interesting and could be really important. So I'm going to go into another short video to have the actual founder of the 15-minute city idea give a small explanation. I have hopefully got subtitles on this because they do have a strong Colombian accent. So the subtitles are a little small, so it might be a little difficult.
For too long, those of us who live in cities, big and small, have accepted the unacceptable. We accept that in cities, our sense of time is warped because we have to waste so much of it just adapting to the absurd organization and long distances of most of today's cities. Why is it we who have to adapt and to degrade our potential quality of life? Why is it not the city that responds to our needs? Why have we left cities to develop on the wrong path for so long? I would like to offer a concept of cities that goes in the opposite direction to modern urbanism. An attempt at converging life into a human-sized space rather than fracturing it into inhuman bigness and then forcing us to adapt. I call it the 15-minute city. And in a nutshell, the idea is that cities should be designed or redesigned so that within the distance of a 15-minute walk or bike ride, people should be able to live the essence of what constitutes the urban experience. To access work, housing, food, health, education, culture, and leisure. Have you ever...
So that's like a really short introduction into the idea of the 15-minute city. And what's been really exciting actually is that, again, this hasn't just been adopted by major cities. There are smaller cities and smaller towns in places in Europe that have adopted the idea. And Ipswich, early this year in March, became the first UK town to adopt the concept. So again, it's a town of about 100 to 150,000, I think, Ipswich. So it doesn't have to be at the mega city level that you aim to include this, but you could do it at the smaller town level as well. And so the plan for Ipswich is to build thousands of houses, but within the town centre that they already have. So replacing things like car parks, replacing things that like empty office buildings that may have been left from the pandemic, replacing businesses that they may not have. And it's effectively a plan for dense housing within the town's traditional city centre. And it's moving away from that distinction between homes in the outskirts and businesses in the centre, which is really exemplified in that US kind of model of everyone travels to the centre and everyone lives in the suburbs. And really interestingly, from a climate initiative, although it's not always been this, Ipswich's didn't say it was a climate initiative. They, they're first aiming for quality of life, but they know that lots more people will walk if their daily services, their essential services are within 15 minutes. But it's been supported by the business district. And if you can get a climate initiative supported by the business district, you are basically going to get that initiative passed. I've had it seen before where a business have opposed something, it's then very difficult. And when they've accepted something and thought, yeah, actually we'll accept this, it's often that it will get passed if you can have that support. And the way they support it is they obviously see it as a way to bring local patrons onto their doorstep. They will support local and smaller businesses as well. And I think, obviously, I was thinking about this at the parish level, because when I was creating this presentation, I had to do some research on Hazlemere as well. And some of this stuff like seems a little bit higher echelons or for bigger towns. But I did think about, in the past, even rural villages and more rural areas or smaller areas were kind of based around 15-minute communities. So on the left here, you've got an old Welsh mining village. And as you can see, the housing there, much smaller than like normal today's housing is built. You've got the local school, you've got local shops, and maybe small local businesses, all within a 15-minute walk and cycle. On the right, it's a village that's near where I grew up in Luton, which is called Shillington. And again, this is one of the main older streets within Shillington. Again, much smaller houses that are more densely packed together, which means that things are so much more likely to be able to be walking or cycling enabled. Sorry, it's much more likely to enable walking and cycling. Rather than today's homes. I looked at when I cycled through Shillington fairly recently. All of today's new modern developments are far bigger houses that are far more spread out, and therefore far less likely for people to be able to walk and cycle easily to access those daily needs. And with the whole change in the COVID pandemic of people working from home, what will it look like with people staying and maybe living for longer periods of the day within their local communities, whether that's rural or within towns or cities as well? And I wanted to kind of sum up the importance and power of these frameworks, because these aren't direct actions that, will reduce emissions, but why I think they're so important. And I was, Fiona filled me in on some of the actions that Hazlemere have already taken. So Solar Streets was kind of asking, what would, the actions that we can take and so forth. And I think why these frameworks are so important is that they will hopefully outlast us all. Cornwall have recently changed political, the council has changed political. It's gone from a Lib Dem, I think with Greens supporting, to a majority Conservative council, and they have kept the decision-making wheel. So despite the political change, that decision-making wheel has not been scrapped, and it will continue to go forward. And that's why I think something like a framework and a way staff make decisions, the way councils make decisions, as long as it's well embedded, it can outlast, say, really great councillors like Ed or Fiona, and it can outlast all of us as we transition on, and it can become a really important part of the way councils make decisions. And what would it look like for a parish council to care for the well-being of future generations? I was very fortunate to work alongside some Indigenous activists on the unceded Coast Salish territories in Vancouver. And the common phrase there is like around 7 generations. What impact will these decisions have in 7 generations' time? What would the community lose or gain in 7 generations' time compared to our needs right now? And it was really wonderful to get a glimpse of a decision-making process that took into account the future generations, like rights, and also the impact it would have on them. And what would it take to take climate, ecological crisis, health, etc., into every decision across an organisation, whether that's a parish council, a town district council, a county council, a national government? How does it work when we have to try and balance everything, all the needs of ourselves as humans and people, and also the needs of the planet as well? And I think even though these concepts can seem quite large, actually it's really important to have every decision at every level of government take these key factors into account. And I was asked by Penelope Tollett, who I think is involved in Hazlemere, to be here as well. I did the introduction with Fiona, and there she gave a talk as part of our local climate policy programme, talking about how culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think it also, culture also eats policy for breakfast, lunch and dinner too. And these frameworks, while they're important, they go towards changing our decision-making culture. You can have all the best policy you want enacted, but if the staff or councillors don't really believe in it, or don't understand it, or don't want to take it forward, then it will gather dust on the shelf. And so why I think these frameworks are so important is that they're embedded across council. In Cornwall's council, every decision is being made, so therefore every key lead of staff of every department will have to know the decision-making wheel, will have to take into account, okay, this is my department, but it's going to have an impact on biodiversity and greenhouse gas, it's going to have an impact somewhere else. And so why I think these frameworks are also so important is they go towards changing our decision-making culture within councils. Yeah, that's the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for listening to me. I think I went for a good amount of time there summing it up. And if you have any questions, I don't know if there's any questions in the chat, Ed, or whether you want to moderate it or how you want to do it. I'm happy either way.
Just unmuting myself. Yes, that's great. Maybe you could take the presentation off to stop the sharing. That would be great.
Sure.
I put a couple of questions in. I think there's been one other. So let's just go through those couple of questions. And then, in fact, everybody, as we're such a small group, why doesn't everybody turn on their videos now to start off with? And then the second thing is, as we go through the questions in a minute or two, please feel free to ask a question spontaneously, because there's not so many people. So, and just from your point of view, Isaac, there have actually been quite a lot of councillors on here today of different levels. So, cool. It's a great audience to be talking to. Yeah, I mean, I put in a question in the upper council levels that you've reviewed, so not parish, but in the sort of districts and above. Are there any examples where they've been setting pretty clear annual targets and benchmarks and then actually costing them out, as opposed to either changing culture or setting a 2030 target, which is 10 years ago, and aren't really costing out the benchmarks on the way?
So in terms of like benchmarks, would that be like for individual actions or more, you know, by this date, we want to reach this level of emissions, etc.?
Well, I mean, in my mind would be if you're looking for a net zero reduction to zero by 2030, you're doing 10% a year from 2020, you know, you're looking for a net increase in biodiversity of 50%, you're looking at 5% a year increase, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But then backed up by some detail with even a costing.
Yeah, in terms of their plans and in terms of interim targets, I would have to say I wouldn't have known many at all that have instituted interim targets, yearly annual targets. And I don't even know if we have annual emission reporting. So there's no council. I think the Bayes emissions, the last one was from 2017. I think I was reading that today. And so that's like a huge lag on our emissions currently. And so it'd be really difficult for a local authority to say, oh, we would meet this level of emissions, because you might not know until 2025 if you've met your 2021 target. And so actually measuring and reporting, this was something I worked on in Metro Vancouver. Annual measuring and reporting can be actually a really key policy change to institute, even before you set the targets. If you were to institute annual measuring and reporting of emissions, that could be really amazing, because then it gives you the thing to say, well, hang on a minute, our emissions haven't gone down enough. And that gives you the kind of evidence, as well as, I guess, a bit of a stick if they haven't gone down, or a carrot if they have gone down, to say, you know, this isn't enough, or this isn't good enough. So in terms of targets, no, I don't know of any high levels that have had interims. In terms of actions and costing, the best one is potentially Newcastle's plan. They have listed out all their actions and they've put in a rough budget. And the thing is, even when I say this is the best one, the budget goes from this could cost around 50,000 to this cost between 50 and 500,000. And so it's not like it's exact in any way. So that is unfortunate. And that's one of the things that we've really seen as well, is that a lot of the actions are, we will seek to, or we will try to, or we will aspire to implement, etc. And so that's one of the key issues, is that there's not a lot of people that are saying we will do this by this date, we will do this, we will have this action done by this date. Newcastle is one of the better one. It does give dates like 2022, 2023 of when they will have things implemented, but the costing is there, but it is still quite vague. And I think it's hard as well, because I know I've given a bit of a long-winded answer to this, but in the sense of, you want councils to take action straight away, and you don't want them having everything costed and done perfectly before they start doing it. But at the same time, if there isn't like a good, strong plan, how do you hold them to account? When they say we would seek to do it, and you go 2 years later, well, have you done it? And they go, well, we sought to, and we didn't because it didn't work out. You know, that's really difficult. So unfortunately, there's not a huge amount of councils that have done that really good level of concrete action with interim targets. And even where they have, it may be too difficult for them to achieve. Like I'm thinking of Bristol now as well. Bristol have a target to have 95,000 homes in the city retrofitted by 2030. But without government investment, how would you reach that target? And when I read that the other day, I was just like, I wouldn't know. Yeah, I hope that went some way in answering the question.
Well, it did. Unfortunately, it's probably partly what I was expecting, actually, but I was hoping it wasn't.
No.
And it follows through a little bit with the Climate Change Committee's criticism and the rest of us of the government at a national level, is the targets are a bit woolly and then they miss them anyway because they miss the sort of overall global target.
Yeah, and I think it's really hard because, so for example, buildings, transport is has been a lot more successful with the active travel fund, for example. Local authorities have accessed that emergency travel funding and then also had longer term funding that they've then gone for. But in terms of buildings, which requires like huge capital, like financial investment, the Green Homes Grant lasted about a year and then got scrapped. So if the government was to bring it back again and say, oh, we've got this new Green Homes Grant, why would local authorities believe that that's something that's going to stick around for 10 years? What was Louise Evans, who wrote the Local Authorities and SIPCAR Budget Report, said, what should happen if the government's serious about it is they should just say, look, here is the money. If you've costed your climate action plan, here is the money, the financial money, whether it's half of it or all of it, that covers the costs of those climate action plans. You've already done the research, you've already done the evidence, you don't need to put in an application, submit your plan to us and we will fund it. And therefore local authorities would then be like, well, we've got this money for this action plan, we will do it. And I think that's what would lead to transformative change, but especially around buildings, because it's such a big capital investment. How could a local authority say they're going to do 10,000 retrofits a year when they just won't have the funding from the sustainable, consistent funding from government? Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. Thank you. Sorry. Now, I did get a question from Zoe, who may have left, but she was asking about the Climate Emergency UK scoring system. And having mentioned it now before, maybe you could give us a 2 minutes description of what that's actually doing.
Yeah.
Zoe has made a comment. 1 second. Zoe's made a comment, which was maybe locally that can be adapted to create a sort of version for us for town and parish councils in our area of Buckinghamshire. But anyway, just describe it.
Totally. So I think it could be useful. Some of the questions may not be relevant because it may come down to different powers that you wouldn't be relevant for. But some of the questions there, like, you know, is the plan easy to find? Do they have a strong net zero target? It's, you know, that real, in the climate action plan, that real baseline of what they are aiming for. And so some of those could be really relevant to the local level. In future years, we're then hoping to mark council actions and whether they've actually tried to meet the targets they've said they're going to meet. But the idea is our checklist, which is quite a long document, which contains hopefully every point you should have within a climate action plan. We basically whittled that down to 29 criteria, and those criteria should be able to be done by every single local authority, whether it's district, county or unitary, Scottish, Welsh, Northern Ireland. And so I think it would be applicable to a parish level. What we'll be doing is when we release the hopefully the Council Climate League with the scores in January, we'll be releasing the questions will be there and with the information. And so it is something that you could take and apply to a more local level at the parish level. And the idea is
maybe it's
sorry, go ahead.
Maybe it's something post this that we do actually get in touch with Zoe and 1 or 2 of the others and just see if we can adapt it for Bucks, and then see if we can propose it, whether it's through Buckinghamshire Council or the Buckinghamshire Association of Local Councils.
It's something, exactly. And we will only be releasing like the full thing in January, just because we're just keeping it the actual question stuff a little bit private just for now, just so we can like actually effectively score local authorities and what they've said. But when that's released in public, it's something we would be happy to talk about and share. And it'd be, you know, if it does help climate action at any local level, that's what we're trying to achieve with this. We're hoping that local authorities, you know, it'll be an incentive for them to be like, well, what aren't we doing as well in, and why is this council doing better in it? Let's look at their plan, and let's effectively, why can't they just copy the plan? Why can't they say this council's been marked really well for in terms of communications? What have they done really well? Let's look at that, and also provide, I guess, that little bit of pressure, citizen pressure as well.
And to be honest, if you add awards into it, because bizarrely they do interest people in local authorities if they're getting an award for having done something well.
Totally, yeah, absolutely.
Anybody else can come in. I'm going to ask the last question I put in the chat if other people want to come in. I know that more than half the councils you've got on your list of the upper councils who've declared climate emergencies have set a 2030 or earlier net zero target. Quite a few of them now have set it a couple of years ago. Some will be more recent. But in terms of anybody who's looking like they're going to be successful reaching there, have you got any examples? And I suppose even if you don't, of those that have got active on it, and again, I know you've graded them between sort of green, amber and red in terms of the most active, those who are the most active, what are the first things they did? What was the low-hanging fruit they've grabbed out at?
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. It's also really interesting because I'd say of the two councils that always come to mind that are most likely to me is probably Nottingham City Council, so that's a district council. They have a really, really good plan that's really clear, really, really simple. Another one to do the difference is actually Somerset, the county and the districts. They have a really, really good website that's so clear and so easy to follow, so easy to find the plan, things like that. But also, they've joined together as a county and a district and wrote the plan. I know they are changing into a unitary, so that's why they may have done it. But they came together as a whole over the last few years and just wrote the plan together and said stuff like that. I think what was really good in Somerset's one is that they had grants for the local parish level, and they obviously funded it in terms of councils, but in Somerset they had grants for the local parish level, which I thought was really interesting, because they said, you know, we have so much money to spend, a pot of money, and if you have an initiative at the parish level or a local group, you can apply this pot of money to institute your action, which I thought was great. Not many councils have even mentioned parish councils within any of their actions, so I thought that was a really, really really good thing to have, and continue to drive local action. In terms of the low-hanging fruit, it's quite difficult because councils are all at different levels. In terms of Nottingham's been doing it for a long time, and therefore, you know, has had a workplace parking levy since 2008, and so they're already kind of light years ahead of some others. I think that I think in the county councils one, something that could be interesting, I don't know if this is happening in Buckinghamshire, is things around park night lighting. That could be a simple action that's easily done. So that's where Essex, for example, turns off its lampposts between 12 and 5 to save money, but also to save emissions. And you have to obviously manage the safety of people. So at junctions, they have the lights on. And obviously you would have the lights on in towns because of the dangers that could thing. But in the rural areas and rural roads, why would you need a lamppost on all night? It's not only driving insects, depopulation, but things like that. I think what's been good for other councils, and I can't remember the name, is that some of them have created interim plans with some key actions, and I can't remember some of the actions off the top of my head, but they've created interim plans with key actions that they're going to take, like all that low-hanging fruit that you've mentioned, Ed. And then at the same time worked on a much bigger plan, so that 2 years later the plan has been instituted. But in the meantime, they've had this interim thing where they've not been like, well, we'll just wait for the plan and then 2 years later we'll start. They've been like, these are the actions we can take right now. These are the things we can take at the council level. These are the things we can try to institute at the community-wide emissions. And then we will at the same time work on a big strategy so that we have that plan that's ongoing. And I think that's something that's really, really key. If the way councils start, that shows their commitment, is if they're committed to action straight away and then still working on that wider plan. Yeah, in terms of low-hanging fruit, there's I can't remember some of the actions, but park night lighting was something that I was thinking about.
Okay, great. I would encourage everybody else. I mean, I've exhausted the questions I had, although I can keep on asking a couple of others. So if people would like to just unmute and ask anything, you're welcome. So please go ahead. I'll just see if anybody wants to before I ask one more. Okay, right. Well, I'm going to ask another one then for the moment. One of the things that we're trying to get done now in Hazlemere is to get our 2030 net zero plan done.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and I know you've talked mostly about the upper councils, but you will have knowledge of some of the parishes. And I mean, Froom's a town council, which is bigger than us, but more at our sort of level. Are there some good ones outside our area? So outside Froome, which has always been mentioned as one of the earliest, who might be doing stuff well on a 2030 thing.
Yeah, I think again, it came to mind because I saw a parish council is New Mills. I think it's New Mills Parish Council. They did a really good thing around community engagement where they basically had and what was really nice, and I meant to get the link so that I could post it for people. But what was really nice is they wrote this whole report, and it's on our social media, and I can send it to you, Ed, and you could forward it on to people that are here or whatever if you send out an email. Or I can maybe try and search as I'm speaking, or that might be, I'm not very good at multitasking, so I'll see. And what they did is they invited the whole local community to come together to be like, okay, this is a climate emergency. What do you want to see doing? And they basically held their own whole day kind of citizens assembly. Their whole day of, they didn't call it citizens assembly, but it was based around a similar thing where they put people into working groups, got people to put down ideas. Where would you put bike lanes? Where would you improve pavement? Stuff like that. And what was really nice about the report is that they actually laid out the step-by-step actions they took so that you could kind of just follow it and be like, well, we hold this event, etc., etc. And I think what's really impactful about that is when you're creating a plan, firstly, you need buy-in from local people, because otherwise, unfortunately, if people don't buy into it, there will be an uproar. But you also, it's like, we aren't experts, and even though this is my job, like I know so little things about local authorities in certain aspects of it. I've only learned so much about the National Planning Policy Framework because I've listened to a talk from Penelope on that. I had no real understanding of it apart from a small amount. And so if you're able to actually capture that wisdom from local people, even the sense of like, well, I've always walked down this road, but I've always felt it's dangerous, or I've always cycled to this school and I've always felt it's not that nice. And then you can understand and be like, well, actually, why can't we put a cycle lane here? Or why can't we improve the pavement here? Or why can't we make small iterations and changes throughout the Hazlemere and stuff like that? And so I think that was something that I thought was really, really amazing, and can be really impactful by parish councils, aren't they? You're meant to be really in touch with your local community because you are the lowest level, that lower level of government, and so you work so closely with them. And so by getting a decent proportion of people to feed into something like that, would make, I think, your plan really strong and also accepted by that Hazlemere community. I can forward that on.
Great. I mean, essentially in Hazlemere, to some extent, it's happening, and you mentioned planning. So I might end with a question on planning if nobody else comes in, but just as an introduction to it, I mean, we have a climate emergency working party. We've also got a neighbourhood plan group that's working on a neighbourhood plan, and they're effectively joined at the hip, because not only are same people on different groups and that, but the neighbourhood plan is effectively about protecting our environment, not only in relation to biodiversity and climate, but generally protecting our environment. So the other thing then actually to mention from your reviews of councils, and again, are there any examples, is planning is interlinked with everything we're doing, particularly at local authority level. Planning and environment are either together helping or in direct opposition, because building every single new house is putting 80 tons of carbon into the atmosphere, which is 2.5 times the remaining carbon budget of everybody on the planet. In addition, if you're building it onto any new land, so whether it's agricultural land, greenbelt, anything except already concreted brownfield sites, you're crashing the biodiversity, taking out trees, stopping or creating extra flood risk and everything else. So it's all linked. So within all your reviews of plans, are all the councils linking what's happening within planning and the built environment with their climate emergency plans?
Yeah, I wouldn't be 100% sure.
Okay.
That's a really interesting question.
Do you ask a relevant question in the list of questions for rating the climate emergency plans?
Yes, so we ask whether the local plan takes into account. We ask whether the local, like the climate emergency plan, is taken into account in the local plan, or referenced, or policies of that within the local plan. And we do ask about the corporate plan as well. So yeah, we do ask about whether they've been factored into, obviously, that bigger statutory document, which is really important. I would say that in the climate emergency action plans themselves, they tend to they don't mention. I'm just trying to review, because I'm not 100% sure, but I'm not 100% sure if they mention a lot of planning stuff. They tend to focus on the actions that they think they can take. And it would be really nice for them to, in their climate emergency action plans, to have gone, yeah, we will commit something like a 15-minute city where we build housing within an area that's going to be easy to walk or bike, rather than building development which is just going to institute car dependency. That would be, I haven't seen many targets like that within climate emergency action plans. Yeah. But I haven't. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's quite interesting, and it's maybe something that is worth, to be honest, passing over to you and Kevin as well. Actually, the idea that we probably should be talking to people about bringing in climate emergency into planning decisions much more, and making it a part of the decision. I mean, the NPPF, as you know, probably from Penelope's talk, has brought it in more recently.
Yes. Yeah, paragraph 11.
Yeah, exactly. So, but also the huge acceleration of disastrous climate events over the last 18 months has shocked quite a lot of people. And even a planning officer or two I've talked to have said that they can see that when you're talking about planning applications now, that talking about climate and environment is so much more relevant and material, because of this obvious acceleration that everybody's seeing going on around us.
Yeah, we just had a thing on our talk today by Louise Evans, who wrote the SIPCOM budget report, and they said that in the people they had talked to in government had turned around and been like, oh, we actually can't believe local authorities are still talking about climate action. We thought they would have dropped it by now.
Really?
Yeah, and the idea that, especially with COVID and all the financial issues, that the people in government are still shocked that, like, they're still talking about climate action. They're still thinking, and I think that really says to the strength of local people who are turning up to council meetings still, or still going to the council and saying, what are you doing? How are you building back better, to take the government's line but actually mean it? How are you, trying to institute that reforms that will change that? And I think with planning, it's such a haze that even Penelope in the talk admitted, they were like, well, actually, I went back to something and I realized that I wasn't doing everything I could, because the Planning and Energy Act in 2008 was never repealed, which means that planning can institute building emission controls. They can do things that are outside of planning and more towards building controls. And so, yeah, I think that it's without simplification, planning systems really, really difficult to even get to grips with. But what has been good, as I said, is the National Planning Policy Framework update. Paragraph 11 is now making climate one of the 4 key things mentioned to take into account. How that transpires to the local level, I don't know, because culture, as I said, culture is so much more important than that policy change. If your local planner or CEO hasn't seen that, then how would they know? And I know they're obviously meant to keep up to date, but unless you are really driving that institutional change, which obviously, honestly, is more focused around staff and sometimes councillors, things won't change in that cultural level across the organisation. And that's why, as a campaigner in Vancouver and stuff, we would often, if we got lots of letters compiled for an action, we would send it to the councillors, but we also sent it to the CEO of the council, because how would the CEO know we've got hundreds of letters in support or against an initiative, a climate initiative? How would they know? And I think it's really important to understand that if there's not buy-in at a senior level of councillors, but if there's not buy-in at a senior level of staff, then things will just get left. And that's the same in active travel, in climate, in anything like that. And so, yeah, I would think, taking into account planning policy decisions are really important. And that's why I think these frameworks are actually really good, because if every planning decision in Cornwall is being made with that decision-making wheel, that's like a big, massive cultural change compared to what has been there previously, which is just the targets of new homes, etc.
Yes, and I mean, just to add to that, we've taken action in Hazlemere. We've recently decided that when we are commenting on planning applications, and in most cases we're effectively a consultee, so we can't make the decision. We're just commenting. But we now have created standard wording for commenting relating it to climate and to our climate emergency declaration. So we keep putting it in. Not so that we just on an ad hoc basis decide it's relevant. It's now relevant to all of them. And that's to try and communicate it to the planning officers that actually this is a relevant consideration. And the comment was recently made actually that in terms of tree protection orders, is that tree protection orders are really an environmental and now a climate thing. And with the recent climate events, planning officers are expecting to see people stating that climate and environmental concerns are the #1 reasons for trying to protect a tree. So that's what they're expecting to come. So, but if people don't put it in, if people always just worry about it in a more technical planning sense, the message doesn't get across.
Exactly. And I think it's really important that continual iteration. And that's why some of these frameworks I think are really important. It's that continual thing of we have to think about future generations. We have to accept all of these different factors in every decision we make every single time, not just of, oh, we're talking about plastics now, let's talk about the climate, or oh, we're talking about cars, let's talk about climate. Every single decision has to be made with that climate lens. And there's other things that local authorities have done, even on a more basic level, like Colchester has a climate emergency check, and it has like a list of questions where someone is writing a report or plan, and at the end they have a few checks like, how does this impact equality or social things like that. Some of the statutory requirements they have to check, but also they've put in there, how does this impact the climate emergency? And there's a few things they have to check. How does this impact emissions? How does this meet our targets? How is this thing? And so again, that's the kind of decisions that, while they may seem quite small level and they're not direct actions, if you can get that really important stuff at every staff, at every level, that's what can really drive that cultural change and that change in every decision that you're talking about as well.
Great, thanks, Isaac. Now we're nearly at the end, so I'm going to give you now about 20 seconds to answer just on one other thing. So it's really just a singular thought. Why 7 generations?
Yeah, that's just come from Indigenous communities. That's the in Canada anyway. That's what they always said. I never actually asked the question why 7 generations. I think it was just the idea of that was a long enough amount of time to think in the future. What would this look like in that time? But yeah, no, it's a great question. I would love to know. Continue to study more about it because I think it's such an interesting way to think.
And I think actually having read having heard from some of our scientists on the IPCC report, we're now talking about 70 or 700 generations, because so much of the degradation to the planet now, they've said, cannot be repaired within millennia, and as a minimum inside several centuries, which is more than 7, but going up to 70 or very many more. So yeah,
that's really interesting. Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Isaac, thank you so much.
Wow.
So thank you very much for that. That's brilliant. So thank you everybody for coming. And we will try to get this downloaded onto the YouTube channel as well and let people know so that other people can be sent the talk and then come and tune in. And please remember to come to the talks in the future. So that's every Monday, every first Monday of the month at 6 o'clock. And if you want to be on the list, then please let me know by email, and you can find me obviously through the Hazlemere Parish Council website. And anybody who would like to take part in helping us in Hazlemere with our Climate Emergency Working Party, please do get in touch. We're always looking forward to have other people join us, and we really do need more hands and more people to help us doing all the ambitious projects. So that's great. Thanks so much, Isaac. Bye-bye, everybody. All the best. Bye-bye. Thank you.